Okay, here we go. Welcome, folks. Webinar number 7, really number 8, because number 6 was split into 2 different ones. Topic is maintenance and monitoring standards and guidelines. And just bear with me a minute while I plug something here. Okay. I think I can skip through this super quick because I'm pretty sure everybody's been here. Screen sharing, audio is by phone, and remember *6 to mute and *6 to unmute, just to control the background noise and what have you. So *6. Interject anytime, especially if I make an error. Questions anytime, or as you know by now, every once in a while we'll have a screen pop up saying questions and discussion. That's a good time. And if you have any questions that are off topic, then we can stay online after the main presentation. We are recording it, but not you, right? Just me. And for that reason, I'll try to remember to summarize or paraphrase your question. And you don't need my bio, I don't think. Everybody's been here before. We went through this a few times, several different types of people attending, including some of which have to write an exam. And so this was kind of intended to help prepare you for the exam and also just to improve your competency and so on. Intended duration is 1 hour. By now most people just laugh at that. It's probably an hour and a half. I'll try to move along as quickly as I can. Number 7. Pre-registration with ASTT is required for each. I keep sending out those broadcast emails to everybody, but I'm not sure I should be. It's kind of spam if I'm not invited to send those kind of things. So I'd encourage you to go through the hoops and register with ASTT for subsequent webinars. Previous webinar recordings available on the Learning Resources page. Just bear with me if you've been here before. One more time, we can Google OWRP, On-Site Wastewater Registration Program, and get there quickly. And OWRP, practitioner side, SPM Learning Resources, top left, and the recordings are showing up down here. So if you've missed any, there's the recordings. 2 more coming that I've submitted but aren't posted yet for the last webinar in 2 parts. And all the other stuff on here. There's our registration page for upcoming webinars. Here's the exercises that I think are helpful, especially if you have to write the exam, but even if you don't. I'll get rid of that for now. Okay. We just saw those learning resources. Learning resources have limited scope. You've heard all this before. CPD was a ¼ point per webinar. So 1 point for 4 webinars. Self-declared, you keep track of it, report to ASTT once a year or so. Any questions or discussion on all that so far? Okay, try to lay out some learning goals to help you because it's self-directed learning, goal-oriented. We're going to try to summarize key changes for standards and guidelines for maintenance and monitoring. Hopefully learn to apply some of those things. Quotes from ASTT policy or SPM are in italics. You can follow along in your SPM, but I'll have it up on screen as well. Let's get started. So my sermon for tonight starts like this. Some of the competency gaps I see are inadequate maintenance plans. I think a lot of planners and professionals miss the point of how important maintenance plans are. Maintenance plans become a prescription, a regulatory prescription, because the regulation says that owners have to follow the maintenance plan. And if it's not implied, then we make it crystal clear in our policy that maintenance providers have to follow the maintenance plan. So for all those reasons, maintenance plans are supposed to be something that a lot of people don't fully appreciate. They're supposed to be a blow-by-blow prescription of what maintenance is, have dose volumes, commissioning details, and some other stuff. The other competency gap I see is maintenance providers or inspectors don't understand what maintenance is supposed to be. So we get the tank maintenance only thing, where people will look in the tank, maybe pump it out and claim that that was maintenance. That's not maintenance, that's tank service, or whatever you want to call it, pump out. And inspection, same thing. A lot of trouble where people only look in the tank, do a flow test, and they don't look at the entire system. Maintenance service reports. We're supposed to produce reports for the clients, and the SPM has some detail on what that's supposed to be. We have some examples online of what those maintenance reports are supposed to be. And back to our website documents, we've got a bunch of examples over here. So here are some useful examples of maintenance reports, not maintenance plans, but maintenance reports, like service reports for the client. And we've got some inspection examples there. And I have some of my own that I'm happy to send you. I've also got some planning examples and so on. So if you want my examples, email me and I'll send them to you in Word so that you can cut, copy, and paste. Speaking of maintenance reports, the vague or flawed reporting terminology. And the SPM now says that when we're doing maintenance service reports, we're supposed to use the terminology in ASTT's practice guidelines. And that includes things like system is operating in a normal manner as intended by its design, rather than saying everything's just fine, you shouldn't have any problems. Right? So reporting terminology is important. Another flaw we see is John *6 to mute. Another thing we find is poorly equipped MPs and private inspectors. In other words, they don't have pipe cameras, locating gear, and so on. Specific to maintenance providers, some of the gaps we see is they don't pay attention to the maintenance plan. They don't even look at it, and that's not on. You know, you may know more about it than the planner who did the maintenance plan, but you have to follow the maintenance plan. You can't do maintenance without having the panel records and so on. No flow monitoring. A lot of people do maintenance and didn't catch the point that it's called maintenance and monitoring. It's called monitoring for a reason. We're supposed to check flows. If it's an old system that has no control panels, no flow monitoring, we're supposed to do something to try to determine flows, even if it's only having a conversation about that with the owner and checking for leaking toilets and groundwater infiltration and so on. Effluent sampling for type 2 or 3. Oftentimes that's missed. The SPM does say we're supposed to do that, which means a lab sample sent to the lab to make sure that it actually meets type 2 or 3. And just general ignorance of what maintenance is. Moving on. Supporting documentation or lack thereof, it's all about staying out of trouble. And having job records, logbook, proper files can help you stay out of trouble. Contracts, emails confirming agreements, expectations, permission to enter property comes up for maintenance and inspection. We can't just walk through the gate, and we have to be pretty cautious, because even if we had verbal permission to enter the property, sometimes things can go wrong. You know, if while you're doing your maintenance or inspection, something breaks, you know, the D-box is all crumbled in and it breaks when you hit it with a shovel or something like that. It's good to have something in writing that says you had permission to enter. There may be risks of damage, and you know, you're covering your butt. Photographic record, kind of a broken record there. We keep talking about it. It's now a requirement in the SPM that we take photographs of key stages of the work, and to help stay out of trouble, it's crucial. Field notes and sketches should be on file, and you need to demonstrate due diligence. We talked about this the other night in the installation context. Is lawyers sue everybody, right? They sue everybody involved. And there's a lot of lawsuits out of there, a lot of ways of getting into trouble. Even if it's only practice review board, your defense is due diligence. You know, to prove that you weren't unprofessional or that you didn't follow expectations. You need to demonstrate due diligence. You need to prove it. And that includes having good records and documentation, right? Field notes, photographs, reports, good filing systems where you can retrieve all this stuff, good business practices in general, so you avoid the he said, she said thing, contracts and so on. And really due diligence comes down to following the rules, whether it be the regulation, the standard practice manual, ASTT Code of Ethics and Practice Guidelines. If you can demonstrate that you followed the rules substantially, you're a long ways to staying out of trouble. To stay out of trouble, get a camera, and by that I mean a camera that'll take pictures of the site before you start work, after you're done, and at key stages of the work, and then get a pipe camera. I realize the topic tonight is for planners, private inspectors, and maintenance providers, but planners may not need a pipe camera, but maintenance providers and inspectors do, period. You know, there is a way. I mean, we're going to have open it up for questions and discussion, but I guess my challenge to you is that there is no way of doing maintenance, and certainly not private inspections, without having a pipe camera. And you need locating equipment. Pipe camera in of itself, you know, as you know, some pipe cameras have locating heads and so on, which then kind of becomes locating equipment. But we need to find things. We need to find not only our system, but other things on the property. You need locating equipment. Don't work too cheap. We talked about that before in other contexts. Not doing any of us any favors if everybody's working too cheap. Shouldn't get every job you bid on. And for maintenance and inspection, you need to charge enough money that you can afford a pipe camera, right? Among other things. You need to charge enough money that you can afford to expose all the components and find the entire system and so on. If all we were doing was showing up and looking in the tank, then we could do that for $100. But we're not. We're doing something quite a bit more detailed. You need to find everything, whether you're doing maintenance or inspection. You need to find all the components, or else explain in a written report to the client why you couldn't and which ones you couldn't. And you need to use that proper reporting terminology which comes out of the ASTTBC guidelines for inspection. Yes, even if it is maintenance, we're still supposed to use that terminology. We spend a lot of money on lawyers coming up with that terminology, which was intended to help you stay out of trouble. And use contracts, something in writing. Any questions or discussion on that part? No? Must be somebody. Okay. So before we get into the standards, I'm sort of anticipating some questions. Is what happens, or what's the regulatory requirements for maintaining systems that were put in before May 31st, 2005? In other words, before the SSR was enacted. And this is a quote. This doesn't show up in the Ministry of Health policy documents, but it's basically a quote from an email that I got from the Ministry of Health. So you guys can sort of speed read that as I'm talking. And this is what they said. The SSR says that systems need to be constructed or maintained by an authorized person. And that regulation doesn't say just for SSR systems. It just says that. So the Ministry of Health, their interpretation is that means even pre-SSR systems have to be maintained by an authorized person, which I find quite fascinating. So that's what they said. Then the next question for them was, what about maintenance plans? And in that case, the answer is the opposite, so to speak. Is the SSR says that maintenance must be carried out according to a maintenance plan. A maintenance plan is required under the SSR, but that didn't exist under the previous legislation. So for that reason, the Ministry of Health thinks that a maintenance plan is not required for pre-sewage system regulation systems. Doesn't mean that we shouldn't create one. Maintenance providers can create a simplified maintenance plan, but it's not strictly speaking required by the regulation. So, maybe it's just me because I live in this world of what you need to do and what you don't need to do, but I found all that quite fascinating. And again, it's not written in the SSR. It was basically, I just showed you quotes from an email I got from the Ministry of Health. So I'm not sure what that means to us, frankly, but it does seem to make sense that all they were really doing was interpreting the text of the SSR. So any thoughts or questions on that? *6 to unmute if you want to ask a question. Everybody's okay? Okay. And then getting into registration policy, again, sort of anticipating questions. I get to ask these questions a lot. Yeah, go for it. The question is, were there even maintenance providers before 2005? And I think the answer is no. I mean, it depends what we mean by that, right? There may have been people doing maintenance, but there was certainly no authorized person. Right, yeah, health inspectors did their thing. Exactly. I think what the Ministry of Health is saying is that the SSR didn't make a distinction. So basically it means that if you're going to repair an old system, you need an authorized person. The SSR applies. So the same rationale goes to maintenance. If you're going to maintain an old system, the new regulation says you need to be an authorized person and comply with standard practice and all that kind of stuff. So it is an interesting point. I find it interesting. But I think from ASTT's point of view, it makes sense that we wouldn't want non-authorized persons encroaching on our turf either, right? So a non-authorized person, if they're allowed to do maintenance on pre-05 systems, that kind of sucks for us, right? Maybe I'm editorializing a bit too much, but that was what they said. Anybody else? Or John have anything else? So, what does it say here? Registration policy. This, frankly, is a quote out of a draft policy. Yeah, go ahead. Right. Yeah, the questioner statement talks about how in the old days the permit to use the system might have said pump the tank out every 3 years, right? Was that just sort of a comment, or was there a question? Or yeah, yeah, right. Which is, I think we all know, is not quite right either. To say the tank needs to be pumped out every 3 years is just plain wrong. Our vision of it is that you need to have it maintained according to the frequency prescribed in the maintenance plan, and then maintenance providers are not supposed to pump the tank out unless it needs it, right? Assessing solids accumulations and so on. So for all those reasons, that was probably a wrong approach, but aside from that, I guess I should move on. Go ahead and tell me if I didn't answer your question thoroughly enough. What does this slide say? Certification as an MP. Ah, yes. So we don't have very many maintenance providers. We don't have near enough to actually follow through with the implied promise. We're trying to lobby the ministry and the regional districts and their educational efforts like Septic Savvy and Septic Smart. We're trying to lobby everybody to make sure that maintenance is done by authorized persons, but we don't have very many, frankly. I think it's a good endorsement to add to your certification, so is inspection. But we do, the other reason why this becomes such a big issue is that so many of our current members are transferees from Alberta. And the Alberta training didn't include very much on maintenance. So the Alberta transferees get certification as planner installers, but not maintenance providers or inspectors. So that's kind of exasperating the problem, meaning that we don't have enough maintenance providers. So a lot of people ask, well, how do I become a maintenance provider? Unfortunately, you can't do it by taking the back door. You can't do it by taking the Alberta training and getting Alberta certification and then getting so-called automatic ASTT registration. You can for planning and install, but not for maintenance and inspection. So the rules are pretty much the same as they've been for the last 3 years. You're required to complete maintenance of 5 systems, and that implies maintenance under the direction of an authorized maintenance provider or professional. At least one of those has to use pressure, and one of them has to use type 2. And if that takes 7 or 8 systems, then that's the way it goes. And not only are you required to do that, but you're required to provide evidence of that for the On-Site Wastewater Registration Board, not my department, right? That's Bob Burns' department. And they review those work examples and then decide whether to hand out the certification. And as usual, those examples have to demonstrate that you're following the SPM. Might be some questions about that, but just bear with me for a minute. The policy says the maintenance plan is an attachment to the letter of certification, and it is a regulatory requirement. And owners and ropes miss that point. Is it becomes a prescription that the owner has to follow, and if they don't, they're in breach of the SSR. The other point is then that maintenance plan becomes a practice requirement for the maintenance provider. So the maintenance provider has to follow the maintenance plan. A few more slides and then we'll pause for questions. Still in the registration policy, any rope who does maintenance or provides any assessment of the performance of the system, blah, 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 has to be certified and registered with the maintenance provider endorsement. And I didn't make that up, sorry if that annoys you, but what it means is you can't do maintenance unless you're a maintenance provider, unless you're registered as a maintenance. And people argue that, all it really is cleaning filters and that kind of thing, but I have some sympathy for this because that's not really true. Maintenance providers are supposed to understand a lot of stuff that the average planner or installer does not. Maintenance providers should be able to maintain any system anywhere in the province, should be familiar with sand filters, combined treatment and dispersal systems, advanced treatment things, every control panel known to man, and all kinds of other things, a little bit of biology and chemistry, and should have some experience. A good maintenance provider can tell an awful lot the minute they open up the tank, right? That a new person can't. So for all those reasons, I think on the one hand I feel a little bit bad that you have to go through all these hoops, but on the other hand, maybe it's not such a bad thing because maintenance providers need to know stuff. It's not as simple as cleaning filters. Next, maintenance providers have to perform it as specified in the maintenance plan. Seems a bit repetitive. And include performance evaluation of the entire system. If you don't take anything else from tonight, I hope that you take that. Maintenance is not looking in the tank. Maintenance and inspection includes evaluating the entire system, including the soil dispersal system. And I think there's 1 or 2 more slides here before we get a question or two in. Maintenance, again, they're putting it a different way, should not be limited to assessment of only the treatment hardware. No offense to people who sell treatment stuff and then provide maintenance contracts, that's fine. But it's not system maintenance unless you're a maintenance provider and unless you maintain the entire system. You can call it something else. If you just have a contract to maintain certain types of treatment hardware, then don't call it system maintenance. Call it something else, like treatment plant service or something like that. And don't sell yourself as a maintenance provider unless you are one. So there's a few exceptions, as you can see. Maybe the maintenance plan prescribes treatment plant maintenance, quote unquote, at intervals that differ from the full meal deal. So in other words, if the maintenance plan says every 6 months look at the treatment plant and every 2 years look at the soil dispersal system, then fair enough. Then that's all right. So I think we've made the point. You read that while I was yattering in your ear. ASTT requires MPs to follow the SPM standards and guidelines for maintenance practices, which is what we're looking at tonight. Similarly, ASTT requires planners to follow the SPM, installers, and so on. So maintenance providers will be in breach of the code of ethics if they don't follow the SPM for maintenance. And they have to provide the owner with a written report. It's not a maintenance plan. This is a written report of the maintenance service. And there's some guidance in the SPM on what that maintenance report is supposed to include. So before we move into the actual standards and what have you, any thoughts or questions on all that? ASTT policy and so on? Everybody's okay? Yeah. Right. Good question. So the question goes to his local regional district is thinking of bringing in some sort of maintenance bylaw. And what were you thinking in terms? What was the question, John? What was the question, Brett? Yeah. Good point. You know, who's going to do it? Just septic pumpers or ropes? Yeah. The tanks would have to be pumped and so on. You know, it's similar to what happens in the Capital Regional District, Victoria, where they spearheaded the idea of a maintenance bylaw, and that's awesome. That's great. But even still, after some revisions, it's basically a bylaw that says thou must pump out your septic tank. Big deal. You know, like that's not maintenance, right? And they acknowledge that, but their explanation is political pushback, is that people can relate to the idea of having to get their tank pumped out, but having a $400 to $600 maintenance service of the entire system, not so much. So I think that the bylaw that is in place now in Victoria, somebody correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think it says anything about that you have to be an authorized person. If it is type 2 or 3, you have to do more than just pump out the tank. But it's a bit weak from our point of view. So all we can say is that if there's a local bylaw that says people have to do maintenance, it says maintenance, you know, it doesn't say service or something. So then that would imply at least that the owners are obliged to do that maintenance as per the SSR, even if the bylaw says you just need to pump out your tank. In other words, to comply with the bylaw, you might have to pump out with your tank, but to comply with the SSR, you have to have an authorized person and all that other good stuff. The other aspect to your question was septic pumpers, and septic pumpers are not authorized persons. So, you know, in theory, to comply with the bylaw and the SSR, you would need both a septic pumper and a maintenance provider. What do you think, John? Did I cover it, or? I'm not sure about the one in Kamloops, but I've heard the people from CRD speak about their maintenance policy many times. Okay. Right. Yeah. Start with tanks. Well, as you can imagine, ASTT and others have been lobbying them to try to actually make it a maintenance bylaw and not a tank pump out bylaw. They're sympathetic. They just can't. They're having enough trouble getting this accepted by all the little, sub areas within their regional district. And I think it's just political pushback. So what? I guess you're right, is that pump out is better than nothing, because even septic pumpers can tell if the thing's not receiving effluent into the D box and what have you. So oftentimes it indicates, or there's a report of a failed system as a result, which is a positive thing. I think that we continue to try to lobby them to beef it up. As other regional districts bring in things, we try to do what we can to influence them. But in the end, it's not a perfect world, right? Yeah, large survey. Yeah, yeah, yeah. That is quite an undertaking. It's all very positive. Most of you know me well enough that you can imagine that I'm kind of a squeaky wheel and all that, and am not impressed, frankly. I try to tell them that, but I'm just one guy. They don't necessarily listen to me. Yeah, not enough manpower. Yeah. Right. Yeah. So just to let me summarize there for the recording, John's talking about one slide talked about how in order to get registered, you need to demonstrate 5 systems. That was one pressure and one was type 2, John. And then the other issue is the catch-22 issue is how do you do that if you're not an authorized person? It's you can't do the work until you're registered. You can't get registered until you do the work. And that's true. And that is the same for planning, install, and all the rest, unless you're coming through the interprovincial trade route, in which case it's more or less automatic. So it's always been that way. We did a few things about it. One is we changed it from 2 years of experience and 20 systems to 5 systems. So we reduced the requirement. The justification, I think, is that we get it, we understand. But if you're going to get your Class 1 driver's license, you can't go out and start driving the truck without somebody with a Class 1 license in the driver's seat. If you're going to... Indeed, yeah. Yeah, which is unfortunate. I realize it's difficult. But I don't know what choice we have. Is we're not going to hand these things out in Cracker Jack boxes, and we don't have enough training. Well, we don't have enough practical elements to the training to actually sort of demonstrate competency just because you have a transcript saying you took the course. So I don't see an easy answer. It's particularly difficult in our field because most of us are independent contractors that don't want to train up our competition. Although I sympathize, I don't see an alternative, and a lot of people are making it happen. The authorized person who provides the oversight doesn't necessarily have to come out on every job. I mean, I can. Well, I shouldn't say that, but one of us can provide oversight remotely, and there's other people who've been registered either for maintenance or the other categories who spent a lot of money, who traveled around the province working for free until they get 5 systems. And although that may seem a bit extreme, that's one way. You can get a relationship with either an authorized, either a rope or a professional, and that's going to cost you some money, no doubt about it. But that's the way it is. I don't see an alternative. Yes, sir, John. Other John. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, sort of paraphrase, John's talking about how big a problem this is, especially in your area, frankly, where you got to go all the way to PG to get a maintenance provider, I think. Um, and then the question went down the path of could there not be training that includes practical elements that would at least give you maybe 3 out of 5 or maybe even 5 out of 5, and that's a really good point. And the answer is, yeah, that'd be a good idea. And all we need is one of the training providers to step up and make that happen. But training providers are handicapped by money. How many people would sign up for that? Especially because there's no enforcement in our industry, right? Or very little. So, I sympathize with them. ASTT is launching a, what are they calling it? A field training program. So stay tuned, we might be able to do something. Good point. Meanwhile, all we can do is go on the ASTT website, find every maintenance provider in the province, and start calling them until you find somebody who's willing to do that for you. I know some people have gone to, I wonder if I can mention names, a few of the people who are maintenance providers, I think I can say including Ron Hine. Like, people have paid to come down and follow Ron around for a day or two. And you can take that same approach with other maintenance providers. So I don't do enough maintenance to offer that to you, but maybe somebody else on the call does. In the interest of time, we'll move on. But I definitely sympathize. I just don't know what else the solutions are other than what we're doing. We reduce the requirements to 5. And we're trying to come up with some sort of mentoring and field training thing. Yeah. Completed has a D on it. Yeah. This applicant is required. You're right. Yeah. I did copy that from their email, so that was there, not mine. But yeah, good point. Awesome. Yeah. Well, and I think it's a good business move because the more regional districts who bring in a bylaw for maintenance, the better that is for our business, Exactly. Yeah, well, let's hope they all do, and I think they just might. I think there's a critical mass building where my hope is that every regional district in the province will have something for maintenance. And yeah, all very good points, guys. And believe me, I sympathize. I wish we could hand these things out in Cracker Jack boxes, but yeah. Yeah, well said. Yeah. Very good, guys. Appreciate all that. I guess I'll move on. As usual, I'm watching the clock and realizing that I have a time problem. So a slightly different approach in this slideshow. I'm not going to throw up on this screen a lot of talking points. I'm going to throw up the SPM and then make my best of that. Let's see now. Where is it? So I want to look at 2.1. You can follow along if you want, or I'll throw it up to 2.1. So, inevitably some of this gets a bit repetitive, but I may try to make some application for maintenance this time instead of for planning. A couple of things. This is Volume 2, Section 2.1.1. Notify the health authority over health risks. ASTT policy and code of ethics says the same thing. So now the SPM says that. And I realize, we haven't got all night, right, to chat about this. I realize that, it may be frustrating because the health authority may not always respond, but your job is to notify them, not to actually necessarily do anything about it. If they don't respond, I suppose you've done your diligence by providing written notification. I'll have a few pictures in a minute about health risks. But when a risk to health exists under an emergency, you may carry out repairs, in fact you should, and eliminate the risk, temporary measures that could fall short of compliance, and without submitting a filing document. Right? At that stage. Next stage then is actually to fix something. So this table is important, two different distinctions, one for component repair, one for system repair. So 2 points. One is that if it's in this list, you need a filing. If it's in this list, you do not need a filing. Next point, if you're a maintenance provider, you can do, did I screw that up? No filing, you can do all these things. I think I did screw that up, but you're on to me. No filing required. A maintenance provider can do all those things on their own, independently, without a planner. But you can't, a maintenance provider cannot do these things unless there's a planner and an installer involved. Clear as mud? And since we've been here before, I think I'll move on. A few pictures, what is a health hazard? We have to report it. That's a friggin' health hazard, right? The guy's standing in effluent. It looks green, I think, because there was some dye. Let's break out the surface, and obviously a potential health hazard. There's another one. You see something like that, and this is difficult. I sympathize. I understand. If you report to the health officer might place a health order on the property, and your clients might be pretty mad. Because now they actually have to do something about this. And that can cost them a lot of money. But what option do we have? Right? The SPM, our Code of Ethics, says we have to report it. It's all about diligence. And if every once in a while you get yelled at and get thrown off the property, that's the way it goes. It's the same thing with an electrician who goes to put in a new light fixture and finds out that the wiring is a hazard. The electrician is obliged to report it just like we are. So again, not a perfect world. That's a health hazard. It's green because of dye, right? We could talk about a lot of other things here, by the way. Look at how deep that is, how much cover there is over it. Clearly below the water table. It's clearly in clay. But for us, the point is that's a friggin' health hazard. Here's another one. I don't know if you can see it clearly, but this is perforated pipe. Those are perforations in there. So, what? Health hazard, if anybody flushes that toilet, it's going to pour out those holes onto the surface. And that's all I had. Any thoughts or questions on reporting health hazards? I think we all get that it's unfortunate, but probably makes sense. Anybody want to discuss or argue? Moving on. This section in the SPM is, what is it? 3.7.2. So this is the first instance of content on maintenance, and it says that planners or professionals have to write a maintenance plan, and that needs a statement of allowable average flow for any 30-day period. Again, we've been here and done that back a few webinars ago, but some people may have missed. The allowable flow is 1/2 of DDF, not DDF. And if you missed that webinar, feel free to ask a question here in a while, but that's the allowable flow. Maintenance provider needs to include that, 1/2 of DDF. You need an operation manual for the system, which could be a separate document. I do them in 2 documents: maintenance plan for the maintenance provider, operation manual for the owner. You need a schedule of maintenance and monitoring. We'll look at required frequency in a bit, and the prescribed maintenance tasks. Right? So the maintenance plan cannot say do maintenance every 2 years as per SPM. It has to list the maintenance tasks, and that's why planners are here tonight, right? Is to learn how to write maintenance plans, because the maintenance plan has to reflect the SPM. And maintenance providers, if you didn't get it the first 5 times I said it, you have to follow the damn maintenance plan. It needs contact information, sign off by owner, and so on. What else have we got here? Maintenance and monitoring. Maintain the system according to the maintenance plan and the standards. Confirm safe access, safety, confirm the sewerage system is performing as intended. So it's not enough to look in the septic tank. You have to make sure that the soil dispersal system is actually working and so on. You have to write a report. You need to provide a report to the owner. And again, you need to report health hazards to the health authority, even if it annoys your client. Questions or discussion on that bit? Feel free. Just because I'm talking fast doesn't mean I don't have time for questions. 2.3.8, we were just there. Next, 2.6.1. Volume 2, 6.1 is about flow monitoring. So, again, a bit repetitive. We've done this in previous webinars, but some of the people weren't there. All dosed systems, not trickle gravity, but pump to D-box, yes. Any system that has a pump, you have to have a method of doing flow monitoring. So there's no point putting in an alarm that's just an alarm. You need an alarm that's part of a control panel, right? So that you can track cycle counts and or pump run times or a flow meter or something. There you go. A method to calculate average daily flow. And I bet the next slide was access provisions. Yep. Which is right there. So you need to have safe access to all system components that require routine maintenance. I'm going to go through all these sections again in a while in the guidelines. So we'll look at all this in more detail, but for now we're just pointing out what the critical standards say, which means you got to have access to all system components. That includes D boxes, every valve, clean out, etc. And just for fun, what do you think of that? Access provisions. First of all, it doesn't meet that because you can't get that filter out very easily without confined space issues. And I hope everybody's laughing their butt off because that filter won't work. Right? That's an effluent filter that is not in a T, for one thing. In other words, not vertical. It's in the wrong tank. It's supposed to be at the outlet of the septic tank, not in the pump chamber. And I'm pretty sure that effluent's going to run right through that thing without being filtered. And even if it does get filtered, it's not right. Right? We've got conduit over here without any sealing and so on. Let's do another one. Same job, by the way. Access provisions. Everything needs to be within 15 centimeters of the top of the riser, including unions and valves, and you need a way of getting the pump out without crawling in the tank. So for all kinds of reasons this is wrong. A few other problems. The floats, as you might note if you have a good eye, are providing way too large of a dose, and so on. There's one. Access provisions, sure, but also baffles and stuff actually have to be under the access provision. There's no way of really getting at that T. It's tucked in tight against the wall. It needs to be under the damn lid. Right? Yeah, there's a good one. I have to be careful what I say. Don't mean to disparage anybody who sells those filters, but I think the filter is not a very good one. And in terms of an access provision to get that filter out, that's not what we intended. Right? We intended something a little better than a piece of haywire. I also don't know why there's pieces of poo floating around in a pump chamber, probably because the outlet baffle of the septic tank isn't properly aligned. Access provisions, you got to have them, but you have to do them right, including sloping the soil away from the risers. Right? This should have had backfill on a slope, and it's just the opposite. It's creating a pond here. Now, those risers may be water resistant, but in my experience, they're not necessarily waterproof. So when you get ponding there, you're going to have groundwater infiltration. And then, of course, we have this problem. A junction box that may also be underwater part of the year. It's not on a post, so there's all kinds of things wrong with that photo. It is an access provision problem, but really it's a pipe settling problem. Remember my sermon about jumping jacks and all that stuff? That T is cocked because the outlet pipe of that tank settled, inadequate compaction. And it's going to be hard to get that filter out, and the filter doesn't have a handle extension and so on. And maintenance providers will tell you that they see that on well over 50% of the systems that they go to the first time. Get a friggin' jumping jack. There's an inlet, and you can see the T is buggered up because the inlet piping settled. The outlet piping also settled, and so if the outlet pipe settles, the T goes up, which means that the working liquid level of the tank goes up. So you can see that this T is, half full of effluent, and there's a slug of fats, oils, and grease. So what? So get a jumping jack. That same T, there's a slug of fats, oils, and grease that's flowing because I started to lift the pipe. You can see how the T's coming away from the riser because I exposed the pipe, starting to lift it. And what happens with bowed pipe? You get no venting, and you get accumulations of fats, oils, and grease. And there's a big one right there. And, for those of you with experience, the minute you looked at that, you went, oh, wow, that is not good. Next, there's a settled pipe and fats, oils, and grease. Settled pipes create a blockage and venting problems. Outlet, again, maybe not the best picture, but the point of it is the outlet piping settled. Good luck getting that filter out. Right? You can see the handle's cocked over. The whole arrangement is cocked over because the outlet pipe settled. And this is what it's supposed to look like after I raised that pipe. Now you can get the filter out. And we had this picture the other day. Things need to be within 6 inches of the surface, which means you have to plumb up, across, back down again. And we could go on all night about lifting ropes and independent support for floats and transducers. We talked the other night about combo check valve. My personal preference now is to put the check valve down there. Blah, blah, blah. Need enough slack wiring in the thing to pull out floats and pumps without excavating. Again, bit of repetition. Access provisions for the lateral isolation valves. You need extensions for the lawn boxes so that you can keep the dirt and pea gravel or whatever away from the valves. Indexing valves need access provisions, highest point of the system. Everything needs access provisions. Risers on both ends of every tank. Lawn boxes are a pain in the ass. They're hard to work around without disturbing them. Ends up with a lot of them, but we need them. That's sort of the point of the backfill job, is to make all the lawn boxes on the elevation I want, which in this case defines a crown, so that this one is higher than this one. And by the way, they're sticking up because we're going to bring in topsoil. So access provisions are a big deal. We need to charge enough money to actually provide them. From an excavating point of view, I should shut up now. It's not easy to do this without buggering them up, right? Let's move on. Any questions or discussion on that part? 7.1 maintenance and monitoring frequency, big change. 7.1 and a controversial change. It's going to take us a few minutes to work through this. Let's see now. Follow the schedule in the maintenance plan. Yeah, so far so good. Shorter intervals for more complex systems. Specify the schedule of initial maintenance in the maintenance plan. And those have to be this. Right? We have to specify those or more frequently in the maintenance plan. But here's the change. Yeah, crap. Bear with me. 7.1. Here's the change, is this paragraph. After after that time, in other words, after the initial frequencies as per table 262, then we can change the maintenance frequency. We can extend it. That requires an amended maintenance plan filed with the health authority. The minimum long-term frequency is 2 years for systems with type 2 or 3 and 5 years for all other systems. That was long-term maintenance frequency, not initial. The initial maintenance frequencies are in this table. Long-term can be no more than 2 years for type 2 or 3, no more than 5 years for others. So this creates a headache for us, I think, because there's a lot of vagueness there. And we'll go back to this issue when we get to the guidelines. The guidelines give us a little more, and Ian and Michael prepared a frequently asked question document on this issue. But for now, the point is this is a big change. And I think it was well intentioned. It was trying to deal with the problem that if you have a section of land outside of Prince George, just for example, with a D box in the middle of 1,000 acres, maybe you don't need inspection every 12 months. You know, maybe as long as somebody's cleaning the filter, maybe you need maintenance only every 5 years. So that is why they gave us this flexibility. And I'm sure some of you are going to ask questions of who determines that, the maintenance provider, the planner, and so on. And we'll get back to that when we get to the guideline. The short answer is either of them. And maintenance providers can do simplified maintenance plans. So there it is. A few other points on here is it does require flow monitoring. It does require testing of BOD and TSS for type 2 systems at 6 months. The old SPM said we had to do sampling forever. Now this basically says you do not. You have to do sampling at the initial maintenance call, not necessarily every one thereafter. Type 3, you got to do BOD, TSS, and fecal coliforms. Another key change, I think, is that type 3 has to be the first call, the first maintenance service, 1 month after it's in operation, no later than 7 months, no later than 13 months. So that's basically 3 maintenance services in the first year, more or less. Where else am I going? Any thoughts or questions? I'm almost reluctant because, like I say, we will look at that in a little more detail. But any questions or discussion in the meantime? Okay. 2. Yeah, go ahead. How do you enforce this maintenance plan? Yeah, are you thinking about how do you enforce it, like to make the owner do it, or? Yeah, I don't know. You know, it's all about education and moral suasion, trying to convince people, having the conversation with them. I know I've gotten pretty good at it over the years of having that conversation with the client, talking about the importance. And exactly. Yeah, when was the last time you had anything done sometimes? And you know, and that's a good question that I don't think there's a great answer for. We've done our job if we had a conversation with them, if we provided both a maintenance plan and an owner's manual, and in both of those things in big bold text we say thou must do maintenance. And after that, you know, I guess we've demonstrated diligence, you know. Good luck if you want to call up your local health officer and say, I want to report a breach of the SSR, and he or she says, oh, what's that? And you say, well, you know, my client hasn't done maintenance in 4 years. You know, it's kind of like, well, good luck with that, you know. Exactly. Yeah. I mean, it's not a perfect world, and we don't live in a draconian society. You know, some places, I often thought the maintenance bylaws should say thou must do maintenance. If you don't, you know, the government will come and do it and charge you for it, like they do in some U.S. states. But that's not happening. There's not a snowball's chance in hell that's going to happen in B.C. So we're stuck with educating the owner, demonstrating our own diligence, and then septic savvy, septic smart, and all that stuff, you know. Yeah, I I know. It's often frustrating for me too, as you can imagine. So, yeah, I can. Go ahead. Right. Yeah. Yeah. Very good point. To paraphrase a bit at least, is the comment goes to sensitive sites, type 2, type 3. There really should be somebody more or less insisting that maintenance is done, and I agree 100%. Of course, yeah, and of course that's what the CRD is doing. It is just a tank pump out bylaw for type 1, but for type 2 or 3, you have to do some more things. So that it's a lot of things can go wrong. A lot of you guys know I live on Vancouver Island, and we have a lot of very difficult sites where if the system's failing, there's pretty significant impacts. Shuswap Lake has kokanee floating up and down, and algae blooms, and a lot of other lakes aren't much better. So, I mean, if I were the king, I would say everybody has to maintain their system by an authorized person, but it ain't going to happen, So we're left with whatever the regional districts are going to bring in, and I guess we should be grateful that they're trying to do something, Yeah. Any other thoughts on that? I know what you're thinking, It's it's not a perfect world, is it? Yeah. But I mean, neither is the rest of the world. I teach, as you know. And when was the last time you heard about a teacher in the public education system getting fired for being a lousy teacher? It doesn't happen. So it's not a perfect world. 2.7.2 maintenance procedures. 2.7.2. It says during maintenance, examine and test everything. Monitoring is a part of maintenance, flow monitoring, and then it says see volume 3. And in volume 3 there's a lot, and we'll go there soon. There's like 30 or 40 pages or something like that. So it's pretty light, Once again, maintenance gets short shrift in the SPM. That's it. That's it for a critical standard for maintenance. But there's lots in the guidelines, and we'll go there. Let's start back into the guidelines. Starting back at the top of the list on existing systems and system repair, volume 3. And so again, as you guys all know, it's corresponding section numbers. What do we want to get on it? A couple of things. Emergency measures could be placing cover soil over a breakout area. A lot of guys are taking cover soil and lime. Something to just mitigate the immediate risk to kids and pets and so on. I'll move on, I guess. So there's emergency measures we can do. And if that's not going to diligently mitigate the risk, then we're supposed to recommend that they do pump and haul. A lot of us have that scenario, and in a lot of areas, including where I live, you can get a reduced rate from the municipal treatment plant. Is that the right word? The sewage treatment plant. Reduced rates if it's an emergency, if there's a health hazard, like way cheaper, the dumping fees. And then you need to inform the owner and do that in writing to protect your own butt, prove diligence, that this bloody thing should be fixed. And, the health authority may issue an order for 30 days, 60 days, and so on. What else should we get out of this? Quite a bit of stuff about reuse of system components for a new use. We're supposed to check VS. That's why we made everybody go through that seminar in critical standards, and the next one is about that, to train up maintenance providers on vertical separation and so on. Access all the components to find out if they're operating properly, assess tanks for leakage, assess the dispersal area for soil clogging. Now you need a shovel. Move on, I guess. The maintenance plan 3.7.2 did I get the wrong? I did get the wrong. That's 7.2. Volume 3, section 3.7.2. There we go. So what does it say about maintenance plan? It says it's submitted with the letter of certification, right? It's intended to provide info to an authorized person, a maintenance provider. So for that reason, it can be written in techno language. The owner's manual, not so much. The standards indicate the minimum items to be included, allowable flow, and so on. And then this section provides guidelines on what it should be. It should also include a section written for the owner that talks about system information that's understandable. It's critical the owner is educated on the maintenance operation of their system, all that good stuff. The operation manual is now typically a separate document. It could be one, but the operation manual should be in language that the owner can understand. And it should describe the system. It should describe average daily flow allowance. It should talk about how we're going to determine that with cycle counts, a troubleshooting guide, information on how to use the system. You know, don't flush petroleum and all that kind of stuff. And what? Let's move on. What else we got? Maintenance provisions, the recommended frequency. The maintenance instructions need to lay out the data to be recorded, you know, squirt height, cycle counts, alarm events, and so on. As a guideline, it says we should have a table for recording that information and checklists and so on for maintenance steps. It should have a monitoring plan, including, if it's type 2 or 3, on instructions on how to do that. Instructions on inspecting the system, flow monitoring instructions, and instructions for actions based on the monitoring data. So, let's see now. Should I go there now? Here's mine. This is the one I'll send you if you ask for it in Word so that you can steal it. And definitely have time constraints again, but this does not mean you have to make yours look like mine. It just means it's my example, and I'm hoping that it more or less meets the SPM. I give info for the owner, basically saying what the frequency is, and they have to follow the SSR, they have to use an authorized person, and so on. And then for the maintenance provider, again, this is maintenance plan, not owner's manual. I give them a little summary. They need to know DDF. They need to know what the system type is. They need to have commissioning details. Otherwise, how can they determine how many events happen in the intervening period? Right? Pump run time, squirt height, float settings in case they have to replace floats, and then the prescription. I realize maintenance providers may be annoyed by this, and maybe they do know more about it than I do, but I'm required to tell them what to do. So that includes how they're supposed to do flow monitoring. So there's the instructions. Take the cycle count, multiply it by the dose volume. Without the dose volume, it's useless. And then not to exceed average daily flow 1/2 of DDF. And you can sort of speed read this as I'm going through it, but measure solids, clean the effluent filter, bunch of other stuff, right? Dispersal system, same thing. Flush the system, how to do that, close all the valves except for one, all that kind of stuff. Inspect the infiltrative surface observation ports, and that's my maintenance plan, not the owner's manual. So hopefully it covered that stuff. And that it included system commissioning details, including panel records, squirt heights, and so on. Floater transducer settings. And where else are we going? Then we get information for the system. Yeah, I hear you. Yeah. Well, you know that it doesn't. It's really only because I started teaching the courses and stuff that I ever figured out all that stuff. But anyway, maintenance plan, flow monitoring, 3.6.1. We'll have a quick look at 3.6.1. One of the things I'm learning from delivering these is I could probably do a better job if I didn't make them an hour and a half. I probably should have split this one up too, but bear with me. It's 8:15, and within 15 minutes we just might be close to the end. So here's the flow monitoring guidelines. It talks about how to do it. The typical way is with a bloody control panel that keeps track of cycle counts, but there's other ways, right? You can do a flow meter. You can do tipping D-box with a counter. I know, kind of weird, but the tipping D-box has a little plate in it, a little vessel that fills up and then tips, and that's a known volume. So if you count how often that happens, you've accomplished flow monitoring, even though you don't, strictly speaking, need it for trickling gravity. It's still sort of a recommendation that you do. For dosed systems, floats and siphons need it, and you can do that with counters and floats and so on, with a panel or an electronic counter. Typically it's that, right? It's a control panel. And I think the next slide was just going to guide me to access provisions. And where are we going? We need to all serviceable points. And I have a feeling I can move on. It includes everything that's serviceable, including the D-box, right? We never used to have access risers on D-boxes, but now we do. All the valves, all the check valves, all the indexing valves, any backflow prevention valves, air vacuum valves for drip systems, and so on, all need to have lawn boxes. Those need to be exposed flush or above finish grade. And by above, typically we mean a 1/4 inch or a 1/2 inch, right? Ideally, if you put it just a little bit too high, the lawnmower will hit it and rip the lid off. If you put it too low, it'll get overgrown. You need unions for things like check valves, indexing valves, and so on. Pump control panels should not be located in the crawl space. They should be in external locations. They're allowing us to put them in a service building, but I don't think it's the right place. They should be within line of sight of the pump chamber. They should be 3 or 4 steps away from the pump chamber so that you can hit the operate pump button and actually look in there and see what's going on. There's a bunch of other stuff in this section about cleanouts, and that's enough. Maintenance procedures is a pretty big section, really big section, and that is the last slide aside from a question. So we are actually getting close to the end, except that this is a very lengthy section that I guess I have quite a bit to say about. As usual, all I can do is sort of point out things, and if you go, oh, I'd never done that, I never thought of that, then your job is to go back and look at this on your own time. But let's try to capture a few things that are important. Local government maintenance bylaws, there are some of those, as we talked about, and if that's the case, you got to forward a copy of something to the local government, regional district. Written report of maintenance, so not a maintenance plan, but a service report to the owner. You have to include all this stuff. Can everybody promise not to tell Ron the weather on the day? You can tell Ron's had some input into all this. Anyway, describe if the system is being used in a manner consistent with its capacity and condition. Oh crap! That means now that a maintenance provider needs to have planning competencies. Yeah, which is why the next webinar is going to be about maintenance providers being able to determine DDF and some other things. For the initial maintenance service, so the guidelines make a distinction between subsequent maintenance service and the initial one. And the initial one requires a whole bunch of things that later ones don't. So the initial maintenance service is a 3 or 4 hour job. It includes evaluating the filing document, maintenance plan, or permit for pre-SSR system. Compare that to what you're finding. Compare the design use to the current use. So now that means that you need to actually access the filing and the maintenance plan. You have to have that in your hand. For an initial maintenance service report only, you need to describe the type and components as well as anything that was not located. In other words, explain to the owner what their system is. You need to provide an evaluation of its performance in layman's terms. And you need to make conclusions about system operation and malfunction. Oh boy, there's a whole bunch of trouble waiting for us. Now, how do we prove diligence, and how do we avoid getting in trouble if we're going to make comments about the system's operation and performance? Well, you prove diligence by knowing what you're doing, following the rules, having cameras and the right gear, and writing a credible report. And those conclusions will have to be using specific language. We'll look at that in a minute. The report needs to list cycle counts, pump runtime, alarm events, and so on, which to me makes perfect sense. Otherwise, the next guy who comes 2 years from now doesn't know what the panel record was when you were there. So the data is necessary at subsequent maintenance service. You need to record the squirt heights, pressures for drip systems, and other stuff. You need to provide a list of recommended repairs and improvements, describing how serious or minor those are, and indicate any repairs that will require filing under the SSR, and you need to affix your seal with signature. And this is, once again, a report for the owner. The terminology, we were talking about how now you need to make conclusions and so on. You need to talk about whether the system is working properly, has adequate capacity, and so on. And the terminology for that is ASTTs. And we'll look at that 2 webinars from now, I think it is, for private inspection. We'll go into that document. There's a link for it. Hopefully you're familiar with it to some extent. It's not saying the system's working just fine, you won't have any problems. Neither is it saying the system's pooched, the system's failed. That's irrelevant terminology. You have to use the terminology that ASTT spent a bunch of money on lawyers to develop, which will help you stay out of trouble. If you say the system's failed, you're just setting yourself up for trouble. The correct terminology is a variety of things. It could be that the system is in a performance malfunction condition. So you're not saying they need a new system. You're not overextending your conclusion. You're just saying there's something wrong with it. And again, more on that later in another webinar. You have to take bloody photographs. The photos, it talks about what those photos should be before, after, and in the middle, the exposed components with adequate detail to support your conclusions. You know, got to be, yeah. So the first maintenance service includes a bunch of things that subsequent ones don't, including figuring out how many occupants and compare that to DDF. So if DDF was for a 3-bedroom home and it was whatever that is, 1,300 liters a day or whatever it is, and if they have 17 people living in there, you're supposed to determine that and report it. Check for leaking plumbing fixtures. So one way is in the tanks, seeing if there's trickle flows, but the other issue is that you need access to the house, at least the first time. You need to get in the house. It talks about discharges from swimming pools, RV sewage dumps, and so on. Educate the owners about water use. Check for water treatment devices. There's a big deal. So we're thinking about potable water treatment devices like water softeners, filters, and so on, which I think you understand is a significant issue for sewerage systems for all kinds of reasons. Including excessive flows, should not be connected to the sewerage system. That's the short version. And then this, you got to check the property for drainage systems. Now, I know it seems kind of getting a little carried away, but how many times have we seen things like that hooked into the system? Interceptor drains, curtain drains, etc. And they shouldn't be. If the drainage system is related to the system, it also needs to be maintained. If it's an interceptor drain to improve vertical separation, then it needs to be maintained. Check to ensure that there's no groundwater or surface drainage, no roof waters or foundation drains hooked into the system, which again means this is not a 1-hour service call, right? This is a 3 or 4 hour service call. You need to charge enough money to make all that happen, have locating equipment and cameras. You got to be in the house to conduct a flow test to confirm that everything from every plumbing fixture makes it to the tank. So now you need 2 people, either your helper or the owner, and probably a cell phone, right? So you can say, okay, flush the next, turn on that. And again, I sympathize if this sounds overly anal, but it really does make sense, because if you don't do that, you will completely miss a gray water system or 2 septic systems or whatever, you know. So it actually does make sense to do this stuff. And while you're doing it, you're checking for bowed lines, surging or gurgling, which indicates bowed, damaged, or clogged sewer lines, and I've talked enough about why that's bad, including lack of venting and blockages. And over half the time you'll find that that is exactly the case. Then at subsequent visits, after the initial one, excuse me, the scope can be reduced. Might not need the flow test and so on. So after the first one, you have to do all this stuff. You have to actually look at the soil system. If there's media in a treatment system like sand filters, CTDS or other, you have to assess the condition and serviceability of the media and determine when that should be replaced. Enough said, perhaps. You got to make written conclusions again, which include reporting any of these things. And it says, it's repeating itself here, you need to follow the damn maintenance plan. You need to confirm security. If backups are observed, you got to check for why that's happening. Again, you need a friggin' pipe camera. I like this one. This was me, frankly. Basically, I was saying you need a shovel. You know, pipe camera is great for inspecting the pipe, but it does jack squat for the infiltrative surface. Right? So personally, if there's any sign of blockages or backups, I think you need a shovel so that you can dig down in a couple of spots and figure out whether the infiltrative surface is excessively clogged. That can be by hand excavating. It also mentions adequate VS. If you're going to make conclusions about the system, you should probably have an auger and a shovel so that you can then find out whether there's 2 feet or 3 feet of VS or whatever is required. Any drainage systems it talks about again. Where are we going? The maintenance provider is allowed, not only allowed, but encouraged to write a maintenance plan if there is none. Repair work Where are we going? Major repairs require a filing, and they are outside the scope of maintenance. So again, that goes back to where we started an hour and a half ago. That table that has system repair and component repair, system repairs do require a filing, and therefore you need a planner and an installer, or you need those endorsements. Here's a whole list of maintenance tasks. So if you're a planner and you're going to relook, take a second look at your maintenance plans, throw all this stuff in there. Right? All this stuff. You can even probably just copy it from here and put it in there. Right? So there's a list of what maintenance tasks should include. For maintenance providers, we all know planners are a bunch of idiots and write crappy maintenance plans. So even if the maintenance plan doesn't include this stuff, then your job is to do that stuff. Right? System testing, look at the whole thing, check records of flow. It's not called maintenance and monitoring for nothing. And it goes on for pages and pages of what you're supposed to do to perform maintenance. Check for trickle flows. I'm just looking for key points, pet peeves of mine. Venting. Look for signs of excess household use of stuff. If you're an experienced maintenance provider, you can tell all that stuff the minute you open up the tank. You can tell right away if there's something wrong. The good old taste test usually works, right? What? Check for fats, oils, and grease. Confirm that appropriate biological activity is established. Again, good old taste test. You don't pump out tanks unless solids accumulations are 1/3 of the internal height of the first compartment of the tank, or the scum layer is excessive, or there's any obvious carryover of solids, etc. There's some exceptions. Sometimes you pump out the tank just because the scum layer is getting excessively hard, or because it's been 7 years. You're not going to only do it when accumulations are 1/3 of the tank, but that's the guideline. My personal view on this is we should not be pumping out tanks unless it's necessary. It disturbs things, it puts more TSS through the system, it kind of destroys the biology to some extent, takes time for it to get back up to speed, and it costs the owner money for nothing. I had another thought, but it just popped in and out of my head. I can't remember what it was. We need a sludge judge, right? You can use a stick, but the stick is pretty tough. It's pretty hard to feel the sludge layer, and we need a sludge judge. Where else was I going with that? Pump out when any of the following. I forgot something, but it doesn't matter. Clean the bloody effluent filter and make a recommendation to put one in if there is none. It does talk about this when you're cleaning the effluent filter. The right way to do it is over the inlet of the tank, right? Take the filter out and then take it to the riser over the inlet side and hose it off there rather than on the lawn. Check the alarm. I should move on, right? You guys are experts at this stuff. Consider the color and odor and a visual assessment of turbidity as an indication of suspended solids. So again, an experienced guy can tell a lot. Inside the pump chamber for a type 2 or 3 system, for a type 2 system, it's supposed to look like tea, not pea soup. Laboratory or field testing might be specified, and sometimes it's something we want to do even for type 1. I know what it was I was thinking about pump out, is you don't pump out the tank until you've looked in it, right? Including if you're an inspector. Inspectors argue, well, how am I going to inspect the tank if I don't pump it out? Well, first of all, I don't think you need to pump it out to figure out whether it's leaking. Secondly, you can't tell what's going on if you've already pumped it out before you get there. You can't do the taste test. Let's see now. Trickle flows, tank integrity, abandoning tanks, a whole bunch of stuff on treatment systems, confirming the operation of air blowers, recirc pumps, and so on, venting. examine and clean UV bulbs. Few key points, and I'll wrap this up, is when we're doing the live workshops, the Ministry of Health asked us to emphasize this point. There's a lot of controversy around media systems used for treatment, whether they be combined treatment dispersal, packed bed filters, sand filters, and so on, and I'm not going to name any names, right, of who makes those things. A bunch of different people do. The point is that if you're going to replace that media, you need to check that the media is disposed in a safe manner, which is an approved Ministry of Environment site. So you can't take the sand, for example, in a sand filter and haul it down the street. You gotta get rid of it in an approved way, which costs more money. So again, I'll try to wrap this up. My point mostly is that there's a lot of content here. So all this stuff, again, are things that you're supposed to do as part of maintenance. Observation ports, infiltrated surface observation ports, a bunch of stuff there for gravity systems, for pressure. You got to check for your equal distribution, squirt heights, you got to flush the system, and so on. For drip, there's a whole bunch of maintenance stuff, for pump tanks, and I think I will just let all this go and point out to you that it's your job to read through all this stuff, and that was a lot. So if yeah, just a sec. So if you're like me, if you're going, wow, how am I going to do all that and still make a living? I sympathize, but in order to prove diligence, you should have a look at it, and I think it's doable. Yeah, go ahead with that question. Yeah. Really? So what you're saying is it's working pretty good. Yeah. Oh, is that right? So you're saying that oops, where did it go? You're saying this one's not so bad. Yeah, I hear you. No, and I certainly don't mean to disparage the product. My personal view is that this is better. You know, that's a I don't know how much it costs, $300 or something like that. Yeah. That's a big ass filter, but it was a big system. It literally had over a dozen people, and there's another one made in the States that's really very good investment. So sure, yeah, no, I'll take that comment with. Yeah. Oh yeah, right. Yeah. Yeah, right on. No, that does sound good. Yeah. Yeah. That is interesting. Yeah. Does anybody else have that experience too? Or? So, feel free to log out if you want, but again, I'll stay on forever. Now I can kind of relax and talk slower. And I think I'll stop the recording.